You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It's a teaching tutorial Thursday, which means class is about to be in session with Professor Greg Cosell from NFL Films University. Momentarily, love Greg Cosell Thursdays. A lot to get to. I mean, in the last 24 hours since we did yesterday's show, 3 Hall of Fame coaches, all in their 70s, are moving on. And I don't know how many of them sound like Saban won't coach anymore, but Pete Carroll kind of sounded like he still wanted to. And I'm very confident Bill Belichick will. We'll get into all that momentarily. We are presented, of course, by DraftKings. You guys know the deal. Tomorrow, already, I'm giving out winners because you're all winners if you listen to the show or you watch youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. But those of you that go the extra mile by spreading the word this week, all you have to do is reply to any of the live streams of this show, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Just reply to any of them. That's how you win. I got some awesome press passes coming up this week. I'll be in the booth with Kevin Harlan in Kansas City Saturday night. I'll be on the sideline with Spiro Didis and Mike Mayock Sunday night in Detroit. Going to be fantastic. Sponsor confirmation email winner. That's pretty easy. You take advantage of the code and get Emery's draft guide from the College Draft Podcast. You guys know about the YouTube shout out. I already gave you the URL there. No new patrons today, so it's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, Greg, obviously we have 6 big games to get to, but there is no way I'm not going to ask you about 3 guys that have been coaching longer than you've been at NFL Films, Greg. Can't say that very much anymore, but Nick Saban, Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick, all in the last 24 hours. I know we could probably do 3 shows worth of conversation on these guys, but what's just the first thought off the top of your head when I mention those 3 names?
You know, believe it or not, it's probably Nick Saban. I always loved the fact that he seemed to be so focused on process and that the process leads to the results. We all know it's a win business. You have to win games. Obviously, college football is different than the NFL, Ross, as you know. You do both college and the NFL. So college football is different. You're dealing with younger kids. There's likely more teaching, pure teaching going on because they're younger and they're more, I guess they're more receptive to that. But I always loved just the whole idea of process, as if you're coaching against the game of football as opposed to your opponent. And if you do that correctly, then the results will take care of themselves. And I just kind of love that approach about process. So Nick Saban was a guy that, and I've never met Nick Saban. I don't know Nick Saban. Obviously, people can sit here and say, well, he just got 5 stars, so he had great players. That you can say that about a lot of great coaches. Normally, great coaches, Ross, as you know, tend to have pretty good players. But maybe there's a reason for that as well. But Nick Saban was the one that really struck me when I heard about that on Wednesday.
Well, listen, Alabama wasn't winning the national championship every other year before he got there.
Correct.
So he had to do something to get those 5 stars if they weren't getting them before. And also, there's other programs where they recruit very, very well and don't have nearly the same level of sustained success. As far as Belichick and Pete Carroll, Greg, anything noteworthy maybe schematically that you noticed from those guys? It's interesting because Pete Carroll had that run where he was kind of known for, the cover 3 and the longer corners and bigger safeties. Belichick, I guess I thought of when I was in the league, the biggest thing that I thought was so interesting about Belichick is how they could totally change their game plan from week to week, like an amoeba. I mean, they could come out and be 2 tight ends, and the next week it's spread. You really did not know what you were going to get from him on a week-to-week basis, and I know that kept our coaches up at night.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I don't think people realize how hard that is, Ross, because, to be able to, it's not a matter of what it does to the opponent. You have to feel good that your players can execute totally different concepts on a week-to-week basis, which means you have to teach those concepts in a way that's clear and understandable, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, because on the defensive side of the ball, if one guy makes a mistake or is out of position or doesn't see it the same way as the other 10 guys, you can give up big touchdowns. So I think that's one thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's one thing about Coach Belichick that is just not really talked about enough, because that is really, really difficult to do at the NFL level.
I remember one time, Greg, coming out of the huddle, and we had never seen it before. I was playing guard. They didn't have a single guy in a three-point stance.
Yeah.
On a 3rd and long, they were all walking around.
The amoeba defense.
And our center, Trey Teague, we had never seen that before.
Right.
There was always some structure to a defense, 3-man front, 4-man front. Our center, Trey Teague, was like, just block somebody.
Right.
That was his call, Greg, because we didn't know. It was the first time we had seen it.
Yep.
And, man, that was something else. And I'll also always remember just how well. I'm talking about Belichick like he's done. He's not done. But I always remember, man, they had that 3-4 defense down pat. We would come back to the huddle, Greg, in Buffalo, and everybody would come back to the huddle, and we'd all be like, I got my guy. I got my guy. I got my guy. It was a run for no gain. And we couldn't figure out, but if they all, played their gap and they were all two-gapping and played their technique, you might feel like you had your guy, but the running back wasn't going anywhere. It was really, and then, you know what? He also, Greg, one of the first guys to really understand the impact of edge guys that could set the edge.
Yep.
Because with Vrabel and McGinnis, that was the problem. They would crush the collarbone of the tight ends to the strong side, and then even if you all felt like you got your guy, it was all jumbled up and there was nowhere for the running back to go because they set the edge right there, right now.
The one final thing I'll say about Belichick, the game that to me, and I did this in the book that I did with Ron Jaworski, The Games That Changed the Game, was the Super Bowl when they beat the Rams, and how he studied the Rams defense in such detail that he decided, based on film study, that the key to their passing game was Marshall Faulk. When he was offset, he was the key to the passing game. So he did what became known as the bullseye defense, where he had his edge players basically run right at Marshall Faulk, not rush the quarterback first, run at Marshall Faulk and hit him to prevent him from being a route runner, a primary route runner in the passing game. And obviously we know what happened. They won the game. But I mean, just the way he came up with that, I don't know if anybody else would have thought of it quite that way.
Let's get to these games, Greg. There's a bunch of good ones. People, a lot of times the Saturday 4:30 game is like, not this year, man. Joe Flacco and the Browns at C.J. Stroud and the Texans.
Are you giving me a clean slate here? Is that it?
Blank slate. Yep.
Well, I mean, obviously we could talk about each game for an hour, so I'll just try to hit some things that I think are really interesting. Number one, with the Browns, you kind of know what you're going to get on the defensive side of the ball. You're going to get a lot of single high, but you're also going to get a lot of coverage looks that are a little murky, because what Jim Schwartz does is he sort of has a cover 2 invert, a cover 3 invert. It's a little murky. Things that probably C.J. Stroud, because he did not play in the Week 16 game, things that C.J. Stroud has not seen before. But you will have to attack single high coverage. That's critical, whether it's cover 3 or cover 1. And, they've now developed Nico Collins, who's their boundary X, and he's shown the ability to pretty much win on the outside against any corner. And I know the Browns have a lot of injuries in the secondary as we speak on a Thursday morning. I'm not sure who's lining up and playing in the secondary for the Browns this week, but I'm really anxious to see C.J. Stroud against a Jim Schwartz defense.
So am I. Man, some of the throws he makes, Greg. Did we miss something with him? Did we miss something with him coming out? Why did so many people have Bryce Young ahead of C.J. Stroud?
Well, I like Stroud more just for a number of reasons, but I think, look, no one's right or wrong until really a guy plays in the league, and smart people are wrong on players, obviously. But I think in speaking to people, I remember a lot of people saying, oh, well, he's just another Ohio State quarterback and they don't do well in the league. To me, I think that's a lazy approach. I think you have to evaluate the player. I mean, you can be wrong. Even when you evaluate the player, you can be wrong. But I think a number of personnel people I talked to kind of fell into that category, and I think that to me is not the right way to go about evaluating a player.
Let's move on to the game I'll be in the booth for. Westwood won with Kevin Harlan. His daughter, Olivia Harlan Decker, will be on the sideline.
Oh boy, I feel for her. It's going to be what, like 6
better her than me. It's going to be -8.
Yeah.
She's a tough cookie though. She'll be great. Dolphins, they're coming into this one really beat up, Greg.
Yeah. Well,
what are your thoughts on this game?
My thoughts on this game, again, you would assume that the passing games are not going to be as voluminous as usual just because of the weather. Mike Martz had a really interesting comment where he said that it's not so much the quarterback, it's the receivers, because it's like catching a rock. And he says it's really hard to catch a football in that weather. So let's assume for a moment that no one's throwing it 45 times. I think the run games become a big factor. I'm really anxious to see the Chiefs run game with Isaiah Pacheco because they've been really good with the gap scheme run game. I really like Pacheco as a runner. I think their guards are really good. When you're talking about gap scheme, you're more often than not talking about pulling guards. And I think Trey Smith and Tooney are really, really good at that. I think you would agree with that. So I'm very anxious to see their run game against a Dolphins defense that's a little bit beat up. And don't forget, even though their tackles are not beat up, in the gap scheme run game, you're doubling tackles, so I think that might be something to look for in this game.
I think that's well said. Anecdotally, Greg, the colder it is, the harder the ball is, which makes it harder to grip.
Yep.
So I can speak to this as a guy that started games at center in Buffalo, at the Meadowlands or whatever. The harder the ball is, it's like it expands. I don't know all the deflate stuff. All I know is the warmer it is, the easier it is to grip because it's like softer. The colder it is, the harder the ball gets. It like expands, and it's hard to grip, Greg. Really hard to grip.
Yep.
I didn't have big hands. I don't have big hands. So it was I did not like the colder it was, the harder it was for me to really get a good grip on the football to snap it. So I guess that makes some sense. I think it's a little bit easier maybe if you're catching it with two hands and you're using gloves. But as a center, I wouldn't really use gloves because I wanted to really feel that ball, and it was not easy. What is easy, speaking of cold, is what cold beer to drink this weekend. It's Labatt Blue Light. Drink some of those with your friends and live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. 4 more games to get to, Greg. Let's get to the 3 on Sunday. The Steelers and the Bills. Steelers are playing better ball. The Bills, man, they are so fun. Josh Allen, Greg, here's my new line on Josh Allen. He's like Superman, and turnovers are his kryptonite sometimes.
Yeah, but they're still a Josh Allen team when you get right down to it. You can talk about the run game, and they do want to run the ball, but at the end of the day, they're going to go with Josh Allen, and he was phenomenal after the first quarter in the last game. He was 14 for 15 in the second half. I kind of like what they did offensively. They did a lot of quick rhythm throws. They kept him, hit that back foot, get the ball out, stay consistent with his mechanics, deliver the football. The Steelers play a certain way. They can only play one way on offense. They're going to have to be able to run the ball. If they cannot run the ball, their offense is going to have a really, really difficult time. We know they're going to be without T.J. Watt on defense. That's a problem. So the Steelers, in a sense, can win one way. I think you have to look at this Bills defense and what Sean McDermott has done with all the loss of some really key players, and yet this defense has played at a really, really high level. And I think that's a real tribute to Sean McDermott and that coaching staff.
So, Greg, when you have George Pickens and Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth, Should they only be able to win one way?
Well, you get to your quarterback. I mean, look, my guess is there's a reason that Mason Rudolph has not played a lot in this league, and when for the most part he's played, he hasn't played extremely
He holds
well.
on to the ball, that's for sure.
What's that?
He holds on to the ball.
He does. He
You know,
does.
on the one hand, I admire his willingness to stay in there in the pocket. But on the other hand, there's like 3 plays in a row where like the ball's getting knocked out of his hand by the Ravens on Saturday.
I mean, I think you're going to see them attempt to hit some vertical shots against the corners. I don't know, as we speak on a Thursday, what Rasul Douglas's status is for the game. We saw him come out, I think, in the second quarter with a knee injury. They will take vertical shots off play action. That's the way they're going to have to try to create some explosive plays in the pass game. And Mason Rudolph can make those throws. Even going back to college at Oklahoma State, he can throw the vertical ball, but he's not consistent from the pocket in terms of, just running a pass game. And, the weather's not supposed to be an issue in Buffalo at all. So the question is, can they run the ball? Can they sustain offense? Can they control the pace and tempo of the game? Or are they going to be caught with a lot of 3 and outs or 4 and outs or 5 and outs and not really be able to sustain offense?
Packers, Cowboys. I think we'll have some explosive pass plays in that one, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at it from the Packers' perspective. One point that's not really being talked about because Jordan Love's played exceptionally well is in each of the last 3 games, Aaron Jones has carried more than 20 times and rushed for more than 111 yards, and he looks spry, he looks fresh. But the Packers are a team that uses motion almost as much as any team in the league. Jaden Reed's become their movement motion player. They're going to play against a lot of man coverage. You'll see a lot of motion to get free access off the ball. Jordan Love is a very aggressive thrower of the football. Now he could throw a pick or 2 in this game. He's only thrown 1 in the last 8 games, but I mean he is an aggressive thrower and he will push the ball down the field, and they push the ball down the field in their pass game. But I think the Jones factor is interesting. Another point to make about their offense, they've been really, really good at a 12 personnel, 2 tight ends. They just got Musgrave back. Tucker Kraft in his absence really became a good player, and the Cowboys usually match up to 12 with what we call big nickel with 3 safeties, and I think they'll feel that they can attack that.
Ooh, interesting. Anyone in the Cowboys have the ball?
Yeah, I mean, we know what the Cowboys are. I think that, Dak's been phenomenal this year. He's been decisive. He's been getting the ball out to the right receiver at the right time. CJ Lamb has become a really, really dominant receiver. He lines up both inside and outside. I think over the last 4 or 5 weeks, they've incorporated the other receivers into the pass game a little bit more. Ferguson, while he hasn't had as much volume the last couple of weeks as he did for a stretch during the season, is still a difficult tight end matchup. So we'll see. I think the Packers actually have a pretty good front. They've just struggled on the back end, particularly when they played zone. So we'll see how that plays out. But when I watch their front, I feel like it's pretty good. So, we'll see if they can pressure Dak and if they obviously stop the run game and get them into some longer yardage situations.
Rams, Lions,
Oh boy.
Sunday night, Greg. I can just tell you're so excited.
That one. You're dealing with 2 pass offenses that I just absolutely love to watch. With you're dealing with reduced splits. You're dealing with motions. You're dealing with stacks, bunches. They do such a good job with their route concepts, with their spacing. I don't want to say they make it easy for the quarterback. Nothing's easy for a quarterback in the NFL, but they really do such a good job of defining throws. They both use play action with the quarterback under center. Goff is definitely number 1 in the league in terms of number of under center play action snaps. I believe Stafford is 2. So that is really a meaningful part of both offenses, and it's an under center play action is tougher to defend than shotgun play action. So I'm really excited to watch this game in terms of the pass games.
Lastly, Greg, the Eagles and the Bucks. Greg, I know you watch the Eagles every week because of some of the media stuff you do. What has happened to those guys?
Well, couple of things are going to happen in this game. Number one, Todd Bowles is going to blitz coming off the bus. The Eagles have not shown any ability to deal with pressure, and it's as if they're just not aware. They're not alert to the pressure. When you play the Giants, who they just played twice in the last 3 weeks, and now you play Todd Bowles, you have to be alert for pressure on every play. And you know this, Ross. Even if your center is the one who calls the protections, teams that have the center call the protections always give the quarterback the ability to override that based on what he sees. And I thought that Jalen Hurts did a poor job of that last week. He didn't seem to be aware of where pressure could be coming from, and he's going to have to be aware of that this week because Todd Bowles is as good as there is bringing pressure. On the other side, God, there's so much here, and we don't have enough time, but the Eagles' defense, they've not been able to rush the quarterback. Their secondary is slow. They've gotten old real fast in the secondary. They're slow, and their linebackers are not very good. But on the other hand, if they somehow can pressure the quarterback, I just spent yesterday and this morning before Thursday before I came on with you of watching about 250 Baker Mayfield dropbacks. And the Bucs O-line really struggles with stunts, really struggles. And the Eagles are not normally a big stunt team, but you know how it is in the playoffs, Ross. You've got to tweak things. You've got to play specific to your opponent because that's the game you have to win. So I'm really curious to see what the Eagles decide to do because it's very evident on film that the Bucs O-line struggles with stunts.
Greg, you are the man. Thank you so much for the time, as always.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it.
Gosh, he's awesome. So awesome. You know what's not awesome? Having one of those old, lame showers or bathtubs, like the all-in-one. I don't even remember what it's called, but that's what we used to have until we got 2 updated, really cool showers from westshorebath.com. Right now is the time to lock in New Year's savings from West Shore Home. Fast, easy, convenient. They came to our house at like 8 o'clock because that's when my wife wanted them to come. It was awesome. They pulled out the old, whatever it is, fiberglass all-in-one shower tub and replaced it with like these brand new shower in one day. 2 of them, not just one, 2 of them. Crazy impressive. Go to westshorebath.com. Why not schedule a free design consultation and then send it to me, Ross at rosstucker.com, and get one of these signed press passes that I'm getting over these playoff games. westshorebath.com.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross. Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots are expected to part ways today. 24 seasons together.
Unreal. I mean, what a week. Yesterday, Pete Carroll and Nick Saban. This morning already, Bill Belichick. I'll probably, Jack, have more to say about this tomorrow on a Finish Strong Friday when I'm making the game picks. I'm probably going to dive into this a little bit more, especially since it seems pretty clear that Belichick, perhaps unlike Carroll and Saban, definitely wants to and will coach somewhere else.
Pete Carroll is out as the head coach in Seattle, and he is transitioning into an advisor role.
So that's interesting because he made it pretty clear that, as he used the phrase, he competed hard to try to remain the coach. He wanted to stay as the coach in Seattle. So they say an advisor role, but he even said he didn't really know what that meant. And he made it very clear he wanted to keep coaching somewhere. So that is one to keep an eye on, just like you keep an eye on your DiGiorno pizza. Whether it's hosting game day, movie night, DiGiorno knows that planning a watch party on a budget isn't easy. You need the perfect setting, perfect squad, and the perfect eats. Luckily, you're a game time mastermind, and you know that grabbing DiGiorno Classic Crust Pizza can bring home a dub because it's packed with half a pound of cheese, sauce, and other toppings and comes at an incredible price. Make the game-winning call and grab a DiGiorno Classic Crust Pizza from the grocery store today. It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno.
Alabama head coach Nick Saban is retiring at age 72.
Right, and I know this isn't quote-unquote NFL news, but guy had a couple stints in the NFL as a DC with the Browns, head coach with the Dolphins. I actually played against him. The only regular season game I played in for the Patriots was against Nick Saban. And I talked to him about that when I called that Alabama-Ole Miss game this year. He loved talking about the old NFL days with the Browns back in the 90s. That was like all he wanted to talk about. Two more notes, Jack. The Bears fired their offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy, and 4 other coaches. I'm not that surprised by that. The Giants and defensive coordinator Wink Martindale mutually parting ways. I might have more to say on all those things tomorrow. In fact, I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out to myfrontpagestory.com. I'm telling you guys, it is by far the best Valentine's Day gift you could ever get a loved one. And just do it now before you forget and you're scrambling late as to what to get somebody for Valentine's Day. We also have Pizza Boy Brewing, Sporticulture, HumanHeadNYC.com, SteakhouseSports.com, BackOfficeSchedule.com. Those are all of the I think we're done here members of Patreon.com/RT Media that get a shout out at the end of every show for only $100 a month.